The second Vice President, Mr. Afzali, Madam Ombudsperson, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I'm sorry that my speech is not going to be in either Dari or Pashto. Secondly, we have just all spoken about the importance of independent voices and transparency and allowing people to have their say. And personally, I think it's wonderful that this gentleman felt able to give expression to his strongly held views on this issue. We can't stand here at the podium and talk about how important it is that civil society and the independent voices are heard and then shut those voices out. So I very much welcome the fact that this gentleman was able to give his remarks from the floor. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm conscious that I'm one of the last speakers on this panel, and therefore I'm standing between you and your coffee break or your tea break, and therefore I will keep my remarks very short. I want to strongly endorse all of the comments made by the previous speakers about the importance of building effective, transparent, and empowered institutions, of the importance of combining a strong approach to improving public financial management with deterrent and punitive action through the courts, through the justice system, to show that there is no impunity, not just in cases of petty corruption, but also for those who engage in grand corruption. Corruption is a scourge on all societies. Even in the UK, we must admit that we have not completely eradicated it, but it is clear from the data that the problem is particularly acute in Afghanistan, and NATO estimates are that corruption and black market or illicit economic activity cost Afghanistan over $12 billion every year. Corruption undermines the legitimacy and the effectiveness of the government in the eyes of its citizens, as we saw from the very good video clip earlier, and as such it undermines long-term stability and drives conflict. Now, in any country, activity which causes a loss of faith and a loss of legitimacy on the part of the state should be of great concern to politicians and to the people of that state alike. But in Afghanistan, where the state is actively facing a violent challenge from an insurgency which disputes and contests the legitimacy of the state, such loss of confidence and such loss of faith becomes a really critical issue. And those who engage in corruption have to ask themselves whether the actions they are taking are contributing to the survival of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan in the face of the challenge posed by the insurgency, or whether you're in fact destroying the house that you live in. Afghanistan is one of the top recipients of overseas development assistance in the world, measured on a per capita basis. And it's very clear that both sides, donors and the government of Afghanistan alike, have clearly set out our shared expectations that over the next few years we will see a trend towards greater self-reliance and greater fiscal self-sufficiency on the part of the Afghan state. And these efforts to move towards greater self-reliance, the prevention of loss of funds through corruption and wastage and mismanagement and fraud and diversion of funds, is absolutely critical to that agenda. There can be no progress towards greater self-reliance without progress in tackling grand corruption and diversion of funds. So, for the UK, as with other donors, I believe, over the next few years, meaningful progress and a real demonstration of political commitment and will on the part of the new government once it's formed will be absolutely crucial to our development partnership going forward. Furthermore, we want to work very closely with other donors and with the government to ensure that development assistance is not only not being stolen or wasted, but also is being genuinely targeted and spent based on the needs of Afghans, as opposed to being spent in line with political objectives. As several speakers have recognised, as His Excellency the Vice President has set out, since 2014, this government has made some really commendable steps in the fight against corruption, in particular through the establishment of several essential independent institutions to provide oversight and checks and balances, and of course the creation of the Office of the Ombudsperson and the Access to Information Commission are very welcome steps forward in that respect. The establishment of the Independent Anti-Corruption Commission will be another crucial milestone in the fight against corruption, and we regret that more progress has not been made in finalising the establishment of the Anti-Corruption Commission. I would call on all parties, meaning both government and civil society, to work together from this point in good faith and a spirit of genuine compromise to complete the creation of the Anti-Corruption Commission. We need not just to create the Anti-Corruption Commission in order to tick a box in terms of Afghanistan's adherence to the UN Convention Against Corruption, but to create a body which will be genuinely independent, genuinely representative, and will have the moral authority that comes from a strong civil society participation and presence. And without that spirit of compromise, flexibility and transparency by both sides in standing up a really effective commission, we risk having another paper body which, as I say, ticks a box in terms of Afghanistan's commitments, but in reality is just another waste of time and resources and creates more confusion in the anti-corruption architecture. I want to really emphasize in closing the importance of a combined effort by, on the one hand, these independent institutions that we've been talking of, and on the other hand, the judiciary, the Attorney General's office, and the law enforcement agencies in the fight against corruption. One of the UK's main contributions to the fight against corruption in Afghanistan has been our consistent support to the Anti-Corruption and Justice Centre, and we're pleased to see the progress that young institution has made. The approach of independent agencies to preventing, highlighting and addressing systemic weaknesses in the anti-corruption fight has to be mutually reinforced by a proactive approach to punish and deter cases of corruption through institutions led by the Attorney General's Office and the ACJC. So both arms of this effort need to be strengthened, and a spirit of genuine cooperation, information sharing and mutual support between both sides of the equation should be cultivated and maintained. I realise there are many aspects to this problem which I'm not covering in my remarks today because they've been adequately addressed by the speakers. But once again, on the occasion of the 9th of December, International Anti-Corruption Day, I want to say that it's an honour to share this platform with a distinguished panel. I want to reiterate the UK's strong commitment to stand side by side with all of those, both in the government, the political classes, and with civil society and the media, who are genuinely and sincerely committed to fighting the scourge of corruption in Afghanistan. And I wish you all a successful day. Thank you very much.
Very much. Your Excellency Vice President Danish, ambassadors, dear Ombudsperson, dear ICAM, dear civil society friends, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to address you today on behalf of the United Nations and to convey Ambassador Yamamoto's regards for this meeting and the best wishes for a successful meeting today to commemorate Anti-Corruption Day. We are indeed pleased to be invited to this Afghan-led and Afghan-owned event, and we commend the efforts and the courage of Integrity Watch Afghanistan and its many partners to promote an inclusive dialogue on more transparency, integrity and accountability with all segments of society here in Kabul, as well as we have seen in the video, also in the provinces. Corruption affects all people in their daily life. It bars the access to resources and opportunities, and it erodes trust in public institutions and compromises the social contract. And in doing so, corruption works against your important work at building a better, a peaceful, and prosperous Afghanistan. While we sincerely believe that the fight against corruption in Afghanistan can only be won by Afghans, the UN stands firmly with you in supporting your efforts in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. The United Nations Convention Against Corruption, ratified by Afghanistan on 25th August 2008, gives us the means to strengthen our commitment in addressing corruption. We do appreciate all steps Afghanistan has already taken to strengthen compliance with this convention. For example, the 2017 anti-corruption strategy, which unfortunately will expire later this month, and we therefore recommend that a new long-term strategy is devised in early 2020, which builds on the many successes of the current strategy after a serious impact review of the strategy. We particularly appreciate also the areas that His Excellency Vice President Danish has identified where further work is required, and in this sense we also very much welcome that today's event aims at realizing one of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption's key provision, Article 6. This article mandates the creation of a body to prevent corruption. We commend that the foundation for this body has already been laid by the 2018 anti-corruption law, and while we are waiting to see this commission swiftly be put into place, let me also echo what other speakers have already said and remind you that the United Nations Convention Against Corruption requires that the Commission is 1, independent, and 2, adequately resourced to be effective in its work. We have also recommended civil society's meaningful inclusion in the appointment of commissioners to ensure that the new Commission will truly have a broad support. Let me take the opportunity to also commend Afghanistan for the legislative steps that were already taken to implement UNCAC. For example, the new 2018 Penal Code, which criminalizes all mandatory and also some optional corruption offenses of the UN Convention. This is an important achievement, and we call on judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement authorities to work together to also enforce this law so that it has a deterrent effect. And enforcement includes the implementation of outstanding ACJC arrest warrants and summonses. Let me conclude with a quote of our Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. "Corruption," he said, "threatens the well-being of our society, the future of our children, and the health of our planet. It must be fought by all, for all." And in this spirit, I thank all of you for fighting corruption today on 9th of December, but also on all other days of the year, which you can make Anti-Corruption Day through your actions. Tashakkur.